Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Stephen King podcast. And this episode is a product of what you would call our own podcast multiverse, because we have our JKL Media podcast that I do with Jesse Jackson and Karen. And me and Karen have already talked about Fairy Tale, but we got Jesse jonesing up enough to read the book right away as well. And he's just come back from vacation, and he's so excited that he wanted to come on and talk about it on the Stephen King podcast. So we're doing that, and you can consider this like a follow-up or an addendum or a mini episode, because we will also be talking about Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which just landed a trailer a couple of days ago for Netflix's adaptations. And Jesse has read that one as well. So we're going to just tie all these things together, and it's just tying our podcast together. So Jesse, it's great that you read the book. I saw your lovely Twitter picture that you were reading it. You said by the lake, but to me it looked like you were actually on the lake.
Yeah.
On your dock with your sun chair. And were you reading it on your iPhone?
Yeah, I had my Kindle and I had my iPhone. I brought it. For some reason I've gotten out of the habit of buying every new Stephen King book when it comes out. There wasn't like he and I broke up for any particular reason. It's not like I have him sleeping on the couch because I'm unhappy. I just had gotten out of the habit. And there was a lot of, it seemed like there was a lot of buzz about this one coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had pre-ordered it, and it worked out perfectly. We were on vacation. We had booked a really nice house on the Lake of the Ozarks. And Christine, who's on the Small Council Matters, the Game of Thrones podcast that we're doing, made fun of me, like, why did you read on your vacation? I said, because I could, but you can read anytime. Like, no, I have to work and I have to do anything. Well,
Right.
Don't you read it like I read at the end of the night? So do I. But the idea of, to me, one of the best things of vacation is obviously spending time with the family and doing things, but be able to wake up and go someplace pretty and sit outside and read,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I ended up reading 5 books during the vacation.
Wow.
And the first thing I did was Fairy Tale. And I just loved this book. I just think it was a classic Stephen King tale. His character, the narrator, was very likable, but human.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love the foreshadowing that he's done other times, where this is not that kind of story. Oh, we may not get a happy ending. Oh, I do not like leading statement people on social media. Well, I'll never do that again. And then it's like them putting a banner going, ask me what happened. And so, but in this case, it sets, because you're going to get that story, it sets it up that I'm anxious for the character, I'm worried about the character, and I'm worried about the journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I just truly loved this novel. And I've held off listening to y'all's discussion because when I called you guys, I emailed you, I said, hey, have y'all talked yet? And he goes, yeah, we have. And I said, oh, I would have liked to talk it. And you said, well, we'll have you on and we'll just we'll follow up. And so I said, okay, I'm going to hold off listening to y'all's, but then I'll listen to it this week when we're doing it.
Cool. Well, first of all, you're forgiven for falling off of Stephen King. You're not the only one that seems to have that problem. Why, I don't know, but I'm glad I've maybe through this podcast lit a bit of a fire under your bones to get back on King, because I've heard that from a lot of people. They'll say, yeah, I just sort of fell off from Stephen King, and then they come back and they read something and then they go, why did I do that? And I don't know.
Yeah.
Is my answer. But
I'm kind of one of those people, although it's like, well, I see a new book and I'm interested in it, so I'll read it, and then for a couple more books I don't.
Yeah.
So I'm one of those.
Yeah. I'm kidding for the most part. Like, I think it's just that there's so much stuff out there today, be it music, TV, streaming, movies. it's really hard to keep something. But like for you, Jesse, your through line is Bruce Springsteen, I would say, right? Like
Yeah,
you've never dropped
exactly.
off of him. For me, King is my guy. He's the modern Mark Twain, and I just everything that he does, whether it's even an interview like that, I make sure to watch it because he's always got something fascinating to say or very insightful. And in this book, he did that as well because King said that he wanted to write a book with a happy ending, and he did that, but it wasn't a saccharine happy ending. It was a Stephen King ending, which is something that me and Karen both appreciated. And we also picked up on what you were talking about, is that how the first half of the book in the real world really was interlocked and twined with the second half of the book. And the first question that I'll ask you is, were you surprised at how long it took for the story to actually move into the fairy tale world?
No, because I was enjoying the real world story.
Again.
In fact, I was almost disappointed when we moved over there because I was enjoying that time.
Yep.
And I did have one other comment there. I remember way back in the 80s, the first time I heard Bruce Springsteen's cover of Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Mm-hmm.
I went, oh my God, this is a Christmas song done in the spirit of Bruce Springsteen. If you had picked, oh, what if we take a Christmas song and we take a Bruce Springsteen song and mesh it? This is what you would get. This is, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, right, well, what if Stephen King wrote a traditional fairy tale story? This is what you would get. And it almost seems redundant to go, wow, he really did a good version of a traditional fairy tale story, but he did. I mean, it has all the traits of what you want in a Stephen King novel, but it is very much as if he had said, well, I want to write a fairy tale. I want to do a pure fantasy novel, and it's just perfect.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you've picked up on the same thing that I said, and Karen said, that I could have stayed in the real world. I was so invested in those characters. It was, King, like, there's a real emphasis on today's media and books and that to start in media res, in the middle of the action. So if this had been written by somebody else, the editor would have said, dude, you're spending way too much time in the real world. You got to get into the fairy tale world. That's the title of the book. That's what the people want to come and read. But King doesn't do that. He's able to spend a couple of hundred pages, and some people don't like that. But for me, he just writes characters so well that by the time they go into the fairy tale world, you're really invested in Radar's plight, and that you're ambivalent about Charlie or worried about him because he's admitted that he's got this dark side. He keeps referring to this childhood friend that they were doing some really bad stuff. So it's not your prototypical blue-eyed, blonde-haired hero going into this realm. And there's just so much more emotional investment for you as a reader when you're going into the fairy tale world, like, how's this all going to play out? And then King just references every literary work from A to Z that has to do with fairy tale world, and Bradbury and H.P. Lovecraft, Rumpelstiltskin, and Old Mother Hubbard, and all this stuff. So a Little Mermaid, for crying out loud. So it's a pretty amazing accomplishment, or he does it so seamlessly that you never feel like he's blatantly calling out something either.
I love Neil Gaiman's Stardust. I loved the book, right, and I loved the movie. But Tristan is a very traditional good guy. His strength is a strength of 10 because he has strong morals and everything.
He's a Mary Sue, which is the epitome of the main character in a lot of fairy tales. Mary Sue, always perfect, always extraordinary. And Charlie's not that.
And I like that idea. I like that Charlie is flawed. I think that, and I love the premise, because why are you doing this, right? What is the character's motivation? Well, his father was a raging alcoholic, and he makes that deal with a higher power. I love the idea that he says, not necessarily it's God, Buddha, whatever it is, it's the higher power. If you will get my father sober, I owe you.
Right.
And I remember there's a local sports station here that says you want to do a name check on thoughts and prayers, right? Like everyone's always like thoughts and prayers. Well, I'd like to check on that. Like, how often are you really praying? How often are you really giving thoughts to that person? And Charlie makes this deal and then says, I'm flawed. I've really screwed up a lot of things, but I am not going to betray that. I made a deal with not necessarily the devil, but in this case, I made a deal and I'm going to follow through it. And I love that motivation. I love how he struggled with it, how he didn't want to tell his father, because that made sense. A lot of times you go, look, if everyone would just talk to each other, the story would be over. But there's actual reason why I don't want to do this to my father. I'm so worried about his sobriety. I don't want to go through that again. Gives you a really motivation to Charlie.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things I mentioned also in our first conversation is there are a couple of movies off the top of my head that are 2 movies in one. Platoon? No. Is it Platoon? Where they do the whole thing, a training camp, and then it's not.
It's the Kubrick movie. What's it called? Oh, Medals.
Yeah,
Full Metal Jacket. Thank you.
Yeah.
Full Metal Jacket is 2 movies in one.
Yeah.
The Vietnam and pre-Vietnam.
Yeah.
And also Stripes, which is completely different from Full Metal. But there's the training camp and the thumb, and then there's the whole part where they go overseas. And I felt like this book was that sort of very similar, where it's like 2 books in one. We have Charlie's story, which could be self-contained if you wanted to make it self-contained, and the fairy tale part, which also could be self-contained. And I really like that we got the 2 for 1, plus they're like mirrors of each other. So yeah, that's one of the things I really enjoyed, and I like that you enjoyed it too.
Yeah, and I really love jumping ahead because I was, as a father, I'm worried, like, God, his father is just going to be so lost and concerned. Charlie was worried about his sobriety and what am I doing? But he has this connection. He feels that he has to do this for Radar. Now, we might make the argument that, do you really need to do this to help give it? I mean, a dog's had a good life, everything. And then I love the ending where he explains everything to his father and they build forward going there. So that was really, I like that they wrapped that up where after the fact, Charlie made it good with his father.
Yeah. I also like that how King tied the character of Bowditch from the beginning, why he was such a dick.
Yeah.
Or that payoff was one of my favorite payoffs. And we didn't really get that till almost near the end when the princess explained what happens to people when they go on the wheel. So that was one of my favorite payoffs. So how about you, Karen?
Yeah, definitely. I like that. And I'm repeating stuff from the podcast we just did. It had a bow on the end of it because I liked Bowditch. He was a sympathetic character, but there were also parts of him that you don't like. And then seeing that there was a motivation behind that, there was a reasoning behind it, I think that really helped me cement the fact that I was right in liking that character. So I thought it was very cool.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about, I had not read the novella from If It Bleeds, right, about the phone, but there's a similarity to these 2 characters, isn't there? Yeah. And so not that he's repeating himself, but just this idea of, and it's a different flavor of a young person with an adult. So I like that he didn't want Charlie's help, and Charlie finally wore him out and worked this out and gave him a little bit of humanity. And I did not see that coming. And then you get the end of, well, when you're on the sundial, it can take a little bit of your humanity. And have you done that, Charlie? And no. And so this gives you the feeling of why Charlie wouldn't be tempted to go, okay, let me go live this again, because he saw what the cost was. And there's always a cost to magic, right? That magic comes with a cost, as we've talked about
in good stories. Yes.
And so I love that about that.
Right. Did you like how The book is broken down into, is it four main parts? You've got the part in the real world, then you've got the section with radar, then you've got like the prisoner section, and then you've got the actual battle. Like which parts of the story did you like the best?
So I really did like so much time in the real world that I love that. The whole Spartacus section is what reminded me, right? This,
okay,
we are about to die, salute you.
Yeah.
Where the idea of, in a little bit of a Hunger Games, vibe, not just that feeling of we are friends and we're now going to have to battle.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of Gladiator.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I can see Spartacus too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the idea of the prince who was promised, right? That whole, you're as you talked about the Mary Sue, you are the golden child. You are the hero that is destined, but you knew Stephen King's not going to just do something out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie is flawed. Charlie is not necessarily, I did worry about, okay, did you bring extra bullets for the gun? Like anytime you shoot that bullet, you only have X amount left. That was in the back of my mind bothering me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love the idea that he ends up being the hero, but a very flawed hero, and self-aware that he is flawed.
Yes. The whole childhood bully stuff was really well done. And I also like that he comes back from the fairy tale world with a scar, basically, like his wrist. So he's bearing that. I was a little surprised actually that King had the character seal off the passage, because I thought maybe because he was scarred, Frodo, that he would go back there, and then I thought he would seal it from the other side, maybe. So I was a little surprised that he stayed in the real world, but I do like that. It's a happy ending because the good guys won, but it's not a happy ending where everybody came out smelling like roses.
Yeah, and he doesn't get the princess, right? He doesn't get to be with that. And there is not universal acclaim that, you've killed the bad guy, now then everything is wonderful. And I love the idea that we get the idea that Charlie is smarter than the average bear, right? And like the idea that he works construction, and the reason he works construction is so he could learn how to pour cement and how to do it well, and they could seal up the earth. And he's like, it would be easy to go, well, I just should go every once in a while to replenish my treasury. Right. He's like, no, this is a danger for this world, so it's better we put that aside. And I like that, the finality of this. Too many times, and once again I can see a publisher going, hey, Steve, if this does well, we're going to want a sequel. Like, why are you got to keep that door figuratively and literally open if we want to do this another story in this tale? And he's like, nope, I have a story to tell, and this is the ending I want. Yeah,
that's a really good point. And it's one of the things that I really love about King is there's a lot of famous writers. We know, like, you can list them off, J.K. Rowling, a lot of the crime writers and that, but they all built their careers basically around one set of characters in a series. King just walks through the whole literary gamut. Like, he's done a couple of sequels, yes, but by and large, I can't think of one writer who's written so many different characters and so successfully brought them all to life. It's just staggeringly amazing to me. I just can't get over that.
And there is a beauty to a series. Like Lawrence Block has written right offhand like 3 different series, right? Like he had his Sculler, which is the recovering alcoholic detective. There is Bernie the Burglar, which is a more funny series. And then Keller, which is the series of novels about a hitman, which, speaking of, right, I now want to go back and read Stephen King's book about the hitman. I saw that and I'm like, maybe I need to check that one out. Now that I've rediscovered my love of Mr. King.
You will like Billy Summers for sure.
Yeah. And so you're right. And there is the beauty of writing a series Robert Krass, Elvis Cole, is that you know the characters, and when you go in there, there's a sense of comfort.
Yeah, Jim Butcher.
Exactly. You put on a comfortable sweater and you're immediately, oh, this is good.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work to build. Okay, from the beginning, I'm going to build this world. I've got to make you learn Charlie and George, Howard and Melissa, and all this other stuff. It is harder to do, but there is a beauty to that. I remember I was lucky enough once that Isaac Asimov was on a local talk show, and I called in, and I'm drawing a blank on the book, but he had written a book that was a standalone science fiction novel. And I said, Dr. Asimov, it was really interesting. As much as I loved Foundation, I love the robot, it was cool to pick up a book knowing it was self-contained. And he said, I'm glad you said that because I enjoyed writing that. It was a nice change of pace for me. So like, I'm going to tell a story, beginning, middle, and end. Yeah. And so that's what King does.
For sure. And it may interest you to know, and not surprisingly, that Fairy Tale has already been picked up for adaptation.
Yeah.
And it's going to be adapted by Paul Greengrass, who's done the Jason Voorhees series. So that will be a very interesting adaptation for sure. I don't know how he's going to work in all those fancy one long shot fight stunts he said he's doing here, but there are some battle sequences in the second half of the book that I guess might work. It's an interesting choice for Greengrass, and it'll be interesting to see how he's gonna pick it up. But and who knows, maybe he will get Matt Damon to star in the movie too. I don't know. Or in some capacity, who knows. But
well, and this almost feels like it should be a mini series versus a novel, because there is, instead of a movie, because there is such a long story.
Yeah.
I do wonder if people who have not read the source material will want to stick with the quote unquote mundane part of the real world. I am glad to know that both of you thought the same thing, that you just enjoyed that a lot.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Jesse, because I think one of my favorite things to watch is YouTube reaction clips. And I know sometimes they're staging that, but especially for The Green Mile, people are watching this movie and maybe they've already seen Shawshank Redemption, so they think this is going to be a very realistic prison drama. And then you get to that moment when Coffee heals Paul Edgecombe and people are going, what the hell is going on here? I just love how King, he calls that hiding the seams between reality and fiction. And this one, that the seams aren't really that hidden, but that's because it's the nature of the story. So this is his most blatant crossover. We're going from reality into fiction pretty blatantly here once they start going down into the stairway. So it's interesting that you've mentioned that.
Yeah. So as I said, I enjoyed the real world. I really liked the fairy tale aspect of it. And as you talked about, there was a little bit, because Charlie is going, oh, well, that was the old woman who lived in a shoe, but she doesn't really live in a shoe, just repair shoes. Oh, this is the little pointing out of fairy tale, not necessarily tropes, but classic fairy tales, a new take on it made it very interesting. Yeah.
He really does delve into the fairy tale tropes. We have the three characters, the princess and her, I don't know if they're her advisors or whatever, but one can't talk, one can't see, and one can't hear. So you've got that very obvious in parallel to the hear no evil, speak no evil trope. And then just flipping back to character stuff, the things that he does with the prisoners. Initially, you hate some of them. I think the one character, was it Eon? Or what was his name?
Oh, yeah. Why am I not seeing it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's
Iota.
Yeah. You really don't like that character in the beginning, but by the time, and you couldn't really care what happens to him, but by the time you get to his final scene, it's a real
wrenching. It's wrenching.
Yeah. And for such a little thing, and the way he goes down is so like a scratch, really.
Yeah.
So that again is just a textbook case of how well King can create character, and complex too, not just simple characters. So
yeah, he's really a dick when he first starts talking in the prison. I mean, really, you thought, oh, hopefully this guy will go down. But yeah, he was like a huge champion. He was the guy who takes one for the team, essentially. So it was nice to see in such a short time is evolving into that character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one trick or trope that it's not a trope, but it's a trick that King uses quite often, is that his main characters often are either writers or teachers, or they love to read. And Charlie Reed, I mean, come on, it's right on the nose. So you're always going, oh, here we go again, another writer. But as a reader, I don't mind that, because that allows King to tap into all these other literary works that we're all invested in already to begin with. So it's a good concession, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that, Jesse.
Well, I thought back, one of the most surprising novels I'd read over the past, I think, decade. I can't remember when I did it, but someone recommended The Martian and told the story that he had done it for free, by chapter, and he ended up putting it on Amazon. Then all of a sudden it became this big hit, and they ended up publishing it. And so I picked up the book and was fascinated how good of a novel it was. I mean, just because I knew nothing about it, I was just flabbergasted how good of a novel it was. And I remember an interview saying, well, him being a botanist sure was convenient. And he said, yes, okay, I'll give you that. But the reality is there would be a botanist if you're on this mission. And it made my story a little bit easier, right? So you want to criticize me, fine, but the story works, right? So the same thing, right? Having him be a writer explains, because there's always that when it's in the first person, why is this person telling this story? What is it doing? And the idea of having it a teacher or a writer does give you that sense of this. And since I'm a big reader, I like knowing that this guy is telling that story and why he's telling the story. So yeah, that doesn't bother me. You have to do a hand wave every once in a while that, okay, it sure is convenient for the story that blank was there.
Yeah.
Okay, right. But once again, then the story ends up doing nothing, right? Like,
yeah.
So yeah, if Charlie later says, look, this got to be too hard, my dad's sober anyway, I'm just going to move on. You have a very short story.
Yeah. I'll just mention, because you brought it up about The Martian, his follow-up book, or it's not a follow-up, but it's his subsequent book, Hail Mary. Have you read that?
Yes.
I actually like that story better. And he takes the white room trope, but he makes it work. It's integral to the storyline, whereas in a lot of other stories, it's a crutch that people use to try to create tension and whatnot. So
yeah. His second book I liked, but I know a lot of people didn't. It was set in like the moon, or I guess. Yeah. But this latest one I think was just as good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really think it was this whole about communication and all this thing ended up being really, really well done. I agree. So yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you wanted to ask Jesse, Karen?
Well, what did you think about the fairy tale people? I mean, they were very fairy tale-ish.
Yes.
But there were very, very interesting modern-y aspects of their personality, and especially Leah.
Yeah, I liked Leah and that bittersweet ending. One of the things I found interesting is at first I was not sure what race Charlie was when he's talking about his brown eyes and his brown hair. And I was wondering, I said, is Charlie Hispanic? Is he African-American? Is he doing something? And because I specifically am trying to, you tend to read and you put the main character in your context, right? It is, I'm a white, straight male. And so therefore my character is. And so I thought that was interesting. I like the idea that he was changing in this magical world to fit the role of what they have of the prince that was promised, right? Very much the whole Harry Potter trope turned on its side. So, and then it changes back, right? Once he's done his mission, he starts changing back. I liked all the characters. I thought that the scene where he gets to have sex and he says, if it was a pity F, I don't care.
Right.
It was still, I appreciate it.
Yep.
It was really nice. And I would love to know more about adult Charlie and his life going on. How much does your life change? And he did do a sequel, right, to The Shining, right, where he did the adult, and how much that has messed up his life.
Yeah.
You wonder, is Charlie going to have a happily ever after life? It appears that he does, right? He seems to set that, but you wonder, is there this side, almost delayed PTSD that's going to happen to him?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, especially after being a prisoner.
Yeah.
And then, he has that scar to always remind him of those times. And I wonder, in that same vein, I wonder if he considers his debt fulfilled or if he carries that his entire life.
Yeah.
So that's a great point.
Yeah. I was left with the impression that Charlie was putting this all to bed and ready to move forward with his life. But
yeah.
And he's come full circle because he mentions that Radar's old again, right? So that's soon to come, that Radar's going to pass away. And then all the ties that he had to that story are really gone. So that's the way I took it. I do want to touch on the point that you made about you were projecting a certain image of the character in your mind. That's a very interesting thing about King's writing. He never, unless it's germane to the story, he never really physically describes his protagonists. He'll describe what they're wearing, what they like, what they do, but he leaves it up to the reader to fill out the persona of what the main characters are in his stories, which is different than a lot of other writers that really get specific about the detail of what their characters look like. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I find that quite interesting, because again, King breaks the rules of what they tell writers to do. Like, nobody would say, oh yeah, take 200 pages to let us to get to know these characters before you start the main story, if you want to put quotes around it. And he does that with characters descriptions as well. So I find that, like, he'll mention McDonald's and Coke and Pepsi and blah, 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 but the characters, no, he just set as a blank slate for the readers to fill in, which I think is a very interesting and clever idea.
I agree. Yeah, I really do. I knew nothing about this. So you mentioned he wanted to do this. I take it right. He said,
yes.
Tell me a little bit of, because I've done no research or anything on it. If you could just tell me a little bit about where this came from and why you decided to do it.
Well, this was COVID related, because he was sitting there, and because we were all expecting his next book this year to be the next Holly Gibney story. He put that on the back burner because he said, this whole COVID thing's got everybody down, and what would I as a reader want to read? I would like to read something happy with a happy ending. And that's what Fairy Tale came out with, the Stephen King flavor of happy. Take that whether you liked it or not. So that, in a nutshell, how this story came about.
Okay, I could see that. I like that. I think that's really well done. And I'm sure it must have. He must have enjoyed that, stretching these different kind of muscles, right? That a different kind of story to tell. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, again, if you've read the Dark Tower series, he's gone into this territory before, and with the Talisman and Black House as well. So it's not totally new for him, but it's just that he just does it in his own special way, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, that is one of the things I've never read, the Dark Tower series. So that is, I have bought the first one and thought I'd go sample that.
That's hard to get through, but if you do get through that one, then the drawing of the three is where the characters come to life. I mean, Roland is a lot like Bowditch in the beginning of the story of the series. So you've got that hook already. So if you know how Bowditch went, but Roland's story, obviously, because it's such a long story, is much more interesting. So the only thing I would recommend is that I'm assuming, have you read Salem's Lot?
Yes.
Okay, then you can start the Dark Tower.
Okay, good.
Because there's a payoff that I never saw coming that I just loved.
Okay, all right.
So,
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's a tough story, but especially the first book is much more like, it's kind of like the Silmarillion as opposed to Lord of the Rings. So you don't really get into the characters until the second book, but it sets up the main conflict and the main ideas. So it's definitely worth reading. And unless there's anything else that you wanted to mention about Fairy Tale, Jesse, I'm just really glad that you took some time to read it.
No, I really enjoyed it. And what was interesting to me is the next book I read is Penn Jillette's book Random. He has a brand new book out.
Don't know that.
Well, I will not spoil too much of it, but the premise is a young guy is about to turn 21. His father owes $2.5 million to a loan shark.
Okay.
Ouchie.
If you do not pay me, I'm going to kill your father, your mother, your sister, and you.
Wow. That's a hook.
Through circumstances, he ends up paying the debt. Spoiler, not slightly spoiler, but because of that and the reasons, he decides to dedicate his life to Random. And so he has, and I ordered the book early through my Patreon. He takes 2 dice, and every decision he has to make, he rolls the dice and he does what the dice tells him to do.
And how does he know what the dice is telling him?
He decides. Like, if you like, I want to watch the next episode of Babylon 5. If I like, let's say let's do an easy choice. I want to watch the next episode of Babylon 5, or I want to start a Stephen King book. Even I read Stephen King. Odd, I watch Babylon 5. He rolls. If he has, I want to have fried chicken. If I get a 2, I want liverwurst. If I roll a 3, I get turkey. If I roll a 4, if I do, and go all the way through the different things, and then he rolls the dice, and then whatever it rolls, that's what he eats.
Interesting.
And so that was the second book I read, and it was really interesting. Really nice change from Stephen King's. So anyway, that's
what else did you read out of curiosity?
I read a quick short story, a collection. There is a book where I'll pull up on Goodreads. There is a collection of short stories where it's novels where the dog is the main character.
Okay.
And they do mystery novels. Chet and everything. Yeah, the Chet and Bernie. And Bernie is the detective, Chet is the dog, and the dog does the narrating.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. I did The President is Missing by Bill Clinton.
Okay.
And that was really good. And then Lee Goldberg has a series of books that are the Ian Ludwig thrillers.
Okay.
And the idea is he writes thriller novels, like Reacher novels.
Okay.
And he ends up getting pulled into actual espionage, and he's just this 40-year-old white guy with like he has no superpowers.
That's awesome.
He's just and he gets pulled into those. So those were the 5 I ended up reading.
Okay, sorry. I thought maybe people would be interested in hearing what you read.
Yeah.
Just a general question about you read those 5 books. Did you notice that when you're reading, like for myself, when I'm reading, I'm usually know that I'm reading, except for Stephen King stories. I just fall in between the words and I'm in the story. Do you have that feeling, or is that just because I'm just an obvious total devotee?
No. In fact, I get a little bit of grief from my lovely bride. Like, okay, you're not listening to us. Like, no, I'm reading. Like, if you want me to put the book aside and we'll have conversation, okay. But if we're all sitting on the dock on the Lake of the Ozarks and we're not in active conversation, I'm going to be reading. And if you need me, I will break out of that world and talk. Right. But this is my version of a vacation, is recharge the battery and getting lost in these worlds. Yeah. Okay.
All righty.
Good.
I think that wraps up.
Yes.
Fairy Tale.
I have one closing thing real quick.
Yeah.
Sure.
This is new since the last time we talked about it, but Fairy Tale went right up to the top of the bestseller list. And on the bestseller list, you'll look and you'll see Colleen Hoover has a lot of books. on the bestseller list. And I like her very much. But the one that was on the top always is It Ends With Us, which is probably my least favorite of her books. And it was nice to see that Fairy Tale toppled it. And right now it's number 3. But man, it went right to the top. And I was like, thank God I don't have to see It Ends With Us on the top right now. So yeah, that's cool. It went right up past Verity. It Ends With Us, past Where the Crawdads Sing, all things that have been sitting at the top for a while. I find that the bestseller list stays static for some reason. Every once in a while, one book will shoot to the top and then it'll slowly go down, but the rest of the books kind of stay there. And it was nice to see that it broke the mold on that it went way up to the top. So very
on
good.
Hardcover, it's still the number 1. So.
Awesome.
And I assume overall, I believe the reviews have been very kind.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Colleen Hoover doesn't have hardcover, so maybe that's why it's still number 1.
Yeah.
Is she ebook only, or
no? She has paperback.
Okay.
But that's it. And she's romance.
I've never even heard of her before.
Well, she's romance, but with sometimes she goes like Verity it's a ghost story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So she branches off. The listeners to this podcast probably have not heard of her. I'll say that right now.
Right. I'm stunned that Where the Crawdads Sings is number 1. That was like a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, Verity and It Ends With Us have also been out for a very long time. They just really hover at the top. And so that's
41,
cool. Yeah.
Crawdads, 178 weeks. Wow.
I know.
Okay.
Well,
I read the book. I haven't seen the movie.
It Ends With Us
was pretty good.
It Ends With Us has been on bestseller list for 66 weeks. I mean, just so you know, they're always there, and it really bugs me. So,
okay, good.
All right. So something else dropped after me and Karen had done our initial review of Fairy Tale and Mr. Harrigan's Phone, and that was the trailer for the upcoming Netflix adaptation of Mr. Harrigan's Phone. And Jesse has also taken time to read Mr. Harrigan's Phone, and you noted in the Fairy Tale review that Bowditch and Mr. Harrigan have the sort of the same dynamic with the protagonists of their stories. So how did you, and that's again King mashing off of other things. It has a bit of a monkey's paw vibe to it as well, the story.
Yeah.
What did you guys think of the trailer?
Go ahead, Karen.
So good. Donald Sutherland, I mentioned that I could see him in that role, but I couldn't see him clearly in that role. And now that I see him with like his hair all messed up and the way he talks and everything, I think he's going to make a really good Harrigan. So yeah, it was cool. And that the lead, the boy actor, looks like he's going to be good too. And again,
Martell,
yeah,
he was the lead in it.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Also, I mentioned this when we talked about Sandman a couple times. One of the actresses from that and The Good Place, she played Simone on The Good Place and Death in Sandman.
Oh, is that the same actress? Oh,
yes.
Okay.
And she also plays the teacher in Mr. Harrigan. So yeah, I like all of those actors. I'm looking forward to it. I got excited. And it's what, next week, 2 weeks from now, something like that. October 5th.
I believe so. Yeah. It's not listing it in the trailer, but it's in October. I know that. And I'm pretty sure it's October 5th, but I'm not sure. But it'll pop up in everybody's Netflix queue.
Yeah.
So
New this week.
Jesse, Jesse, what'd you think of the trailer?
So I had not read the short story, and then I went and read it. An interesting premise. I just love Donald Sutherland. He's so charismatic, and to see once again the young man adult relationship, a different twist on that, especially since we just read Fairy Tale, is really cool. So I was intrigued enough that when I saw the trailer, I went, oh, well, let me go get the book. And so I was able to get a copy of the book and read it, and just really, this looks like a more traditional horror story, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not my favorite. I'm not, that's what I think maybe one of the reasons why I don't necessarily follow Stephen King is that horror is not my favorite genre. But this looks like a great story to get to see what we're going to do, right?
I don't know if I'd classify it as straight horror. I think it's more like a thriller slash horror.
Yeah. I love how King will take and this is more of the trailer than because in the book, obviously, you can't hear things. But it's amazing how they can take what we take as a normal everyday sound, but that buzzing of an iPhone and make it ominous. I just love that. Every time that stone started to buzz, I was just like, oh man, that's so cool. Yeah. So I really like that. I'm going to recommend another King book to you, Jesse, and it's a real quick read, is Elevation.
Okay.
It's if you've ever seen The Incredible Shrinking Man, this is the reverse of that in a way.
Okay.
So it's a very quick read. I don't know if it's 40, 50 pages, but the conceit of the story is, and it's like his thinner story, but this person keeps losing weight, but they don't lose mass. So they're becoming lighter, but physically they look the same to outwardly.
Okay.
And it's a slice of life. And like this, Mr. Harrigan's phone, it makes all these characters come to life. There's the relationship between the boy and Mr. Harrigan and that story, but there's also the relationship between the boy and the teacher, and that he has a crush on. And I'll be really interested to see in this adaptation with the actor that's playing it, because I thought she was fantastic in Sandman as Death. So I'm sure that she's going to bring some real pathos to those scenes. So I'm really looking forward to that.
She's a really good actress. Really good.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of The Good Place, I did not realize till just this latest episode of She-Hulk that Jamel, who was in The Good Place, is
Tahani.
Tahani. Yeah, I was so happy because she was great in The Good Place, and she's playing a little different character. And on her Twitter, she says, "I'm playing a Marvel superhero. Your dreams can come true."
I don't know. I wouldn't call her a superhero.
An action, I think she said
an action character.
Hero.
Okay. Yeah. She's very modern day, with the influencer. I'm gonna make my own line of clothing and all that.
Yes.
And I like that she has an American accent, so she's disguised, and then she doesn't even look like Tahani, which makes it better. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off topic, but
no, it's good. All right, well, so it sounds like that I've got some homework to do on some Stephen King books, right?
Oh, if we're going to crawl back into that hole, the guy's written 65
a million
novels
now.
Yeah, I think that might also be the reason, right? Like, I can't keep up.
Well, and the beautiful thing is they're not all interconnected, so you can pick and choose which one you want to read. You'll miss a little subtle nuances of the metaverse that King's built up, because all his books are interconnected through the Dark Tower. But it's
good.
So I'll put Billy Summers and Elevation on my list as well. I have them both on the Kindle. So,
and if you want straight up more horror, can't remember something that if you're by yourself, you can pull it up so quickly. Is it Revelation? That's got a real dark ending. I don't think Jesse will like that one, but you might.
Well, if you, I'm a big fan of Lawrence Block, and there is a Hit List. Hitman is a collection. It started out as a collection of short stories, and then he ended up writing novels. And Keller is a hitman, and I really, really recommend those books. It's messed up that you end up pulling for the guy who is a contract killer, but it is really well done, and I'm a big fan of his books. So
I like that when you get a dark hero. I really do like that.
Yeah.
Like Scorpius.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So good. All right. Well, thank you for this. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, Lou.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Revival is the name of that story.
Oh, Revival.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will check that out.
That.
Yeah, that's pretty dark. I would say that, and I don't know if you've read the Gwendy trilogy either. That's also interesting. But
I don't have Revival. I'll have to get that.
Yeah, it's very Lovecraftian, and it's the conceit is you keep running into the same one person through various stages of your life. So,
okay.
I like that.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
Good.
it's cool. All right. Well, I thank you both for coming back on in this follow-up episode to mostly Fairy Tale and a little bit of Mr. Harrigan's phone. And I don't know, Karen, I left you with a mission to pick your favorite, all-time favorite King story, movie, whatever that we were going to do as our next podcast. Have you had any luck with that yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, my all-time favorite is 11/22/63.
Okay.
I don't know why, but it is my favorite.
Sure.
And we have talked about it before, but I think I might want to reread it and then go back and talk about it again.
I think when we talked about it was the miniseries.
The miniseries, right? I think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I adore that book.
Okay.
It's timey-wimey and, all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dead Zone is my favorite. It just remains to this day. Though Fairy Tale would be close. It would be, it's really come up with there. So
is that for sentimental reasons? Is that your first King book? Or
yes, it was the first, because I think, as I shared last time I was on, I had no interest in horror, horror. And my buddy David Fair, rest in peace. David said he gave me the hardback of Dead Zone and said, "You must read this book. I don't like horror. You must read this book." And when I read it, I fell in love. Just
cool.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, pretty good TV series too.
Yes, the TV show went in a whole different way, but yes, I loved it.
Yeah. Okay, folks, that brings us to the end of this episode. Jesse, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your feelings about. It's like a flip side of being on Set Listing Bruce for you, I guess, because you're usually procuring people's opinions about something that you love. Now we're doing the same thing for you with something that I love.
I got to figure out what my thing is. I don't know that I have a thing.
You have too many things.
Yeah,
you're the podcast mom.
I'm a Renaissance woman.
Yes,
you are.
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Romance novels. I don't
know. I read all kinds of books, though. I mean, that would just be books in general, right?
Yeah. I think you're mostly a game night, aren't you?
There's that. But I'm not obsessed with it. Like, I could quit.
Oh, okay.
I could quit if I wanted to. And I don't play very much. Maybe.
No, I meant Neil Gaiman.
Oh, Gaiman.
Game and night.
I thought you were talking about video games.
No.
Neil Gaiman, I guess.
Yeah,
I guess.
He's kind of up there.
Yeah.
Anyhow, as we bow out, Karen, where can people find you?
At Aliveria on Twitter machine, Karen, not Karen. And I have updated my blog, so the link in my bio on Twitter goes to my blog with a pretty little GIF image at the top. It's very cool, I think. Stop by and look at it. So, that's where you can find me.
Cool. And Jesse?
Well, I am at Jesse Jackson DFW. You can hear me talk Game of Thrones, the House of the Dragon, on Small Council Matters on the Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV podcast feed. And you can hear me talk music on Set Listing Bruce, where we just hit my 7th anniversary and over 900 episodes. So
that's dedication.
A lot of rock and roll talk. So
yes. And of course I can be found on YouTube at Lose Reviews, and I put the Stephen King podcast. And for Stephen King fans who don't check all my other playlists, you might want to check my last writers episode, because I interviewed writer Bev Vincent, who just released the updated version of his Stephen King illustrated guide. It's the complete works. So it's a fantastic reference source for people. Covers everything from King up until Fairy Tale. And we'll have to see if there'll be a 3rd edition. So
I got to buy that now too, because I have the first one.
Do you have the first one that has like the little pull-out things? Yeah, that's if you can find the first edition of that book, it's really cool. There's little pull-out facsimiles of handwritten notes. And
it's very cool.
Short stories, pages that King did, and it's the best bang for buck reference guide that that you'll find.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, you have to get the first edition, because the second edition, they just incorporated those pullouts actually into the pages of the book. So anyhow, so there's that. And you can also find our Babylon 5 podcast there. We have our JKLL Media podcast, where we do specials on one-offs. Our next one is going to be Station 11. And I guess we're starting that next week, Jesse?
Yes, that sounds good.
First 2 episodes?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay. So there you go, folks. Enjoy yourself. We'll be talking to you. And remember, stay safe, but stay scared. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bum, bum, bum.
And see.